This is episode 29, and in this episode we are going to be looking at constructors. So as the name suggests, constructors, they are used to construct objects, and typically they act on attributes, as it were. So in Java, a constructor is just a special method. As I've said just now, it's used to initialize an object, or to give objects an initial value, as it were. Then the constructor is called when an object of a class is created, and it can be used to set initial values for object attributes. So let's actually go ahead and create a constructor for this particular class. So in order to construct a constructor, constructor, nice. Alright, so in order to create a constructor, you can actually make use of the keyword public. Then you need to have the same name for your constructor as the class name, right? So in this instance, you realize that the only thing that's different between a constructor and its class is that it's missing the class keyword, and it's also going to have a parenthesis to show that it is a method. So hence we say that a constructor is a special method, right? So what you can do in order for it to actually act on something, because remember we need attributes. Let's create an attribute called name. Then let's also create an attribute called double. Maybe let's just call this one price, right? So what you can do now is so you remember that in the previous episodes we actually can override attribute values within the main method is right after creating a particular method, right after creating an object for a particular class. So maybe let's create a method called let's just call this one object1, and we'll say new, then we'll call the default constructor, right? Then what we can do is we can then sys out let's say object1 dot name, right? Then maybe what you can do, actually let's actually do this. Let's say object1 dot name is equal to something. Then we can then come down on line 17 there and then print out that name. So let's actually just compile and run this. So Java C constructors dot java, and to compile, then we need to run it. So Java constructors, so we do get something down there, right? But now the problem with this particular method of assigning default values right after instantiating an object is that oftentimes you might be working with a lot of variables, or rather a lot of objects that you might want to create, and also sometimes you might want to have a little bit of logic going on before you create an object with a particular value. Like in this case, you might want to check to see if the name that is going to be supplied for a particular method conforms to maybe say a given set of names, and so forth and so on. Alright, so that is where constructors come into play. So with a constructor, we can now take this code and we can say name. We can come here and then say name is going to be equal to let's just say still something, right? Then what I can do now is I can uncomment this, right? And then I'm just gonna say object.name. So I want you to notice that we just instantiated an object, but we didn't actually assign a value for the object's name, as it were. But when we do run this code, I want you to notice what's going to happen. We actually get still something, right? So what happened was, the moment we code or the moment we created this particular object called object1, and we assigned it to new, right? That is the new keyword. You always use it before you call a constructor. So the constructors that we are calling, or the reference to constructors right here, is pointing to this particular constructor that you see on line 8 to line 11 there. So essentially, whenever we create an object, right, it's actually going to call this by default. This is actually going to be called behind the scenes, and it's going to set the name to steal something, just like that. So it's going to save us the trouble of having to actually assign a particular value upon creating the object. Then we need to set the name, just like that. So we can actually add on to this constructor and actually put price. Maybe let's say it's $8.99, right? Then by default, when we compile this code, our object, that is object 1, it's actually going to have its price set to $8.99, such that even if we come down here and we say object 1 dot price, you'd realize that we get $8.99. So I'm just going to compile and run it one more time. Then you should see that we get $8.99 there. So that's the benefit of using constructors for your particular in your particular program, particularly if you are going to be making use of objects, as it were. So yeah, then maybe one more thing that I should mention is you can actually create a constructor that can take parameters, right? If you remember, we had okay, let me actually do this. I know we haven't looked at overriding, but we can actually do this, because since a constructor is a special method, it means that when you create an object, you can choose which particular constructor you want to call. So maybe let's have a string. Maybe let's just call this one. Let's call it total. Then you can also have another one, int, maybe called count, right? Then what we can do is that we can now take the name and set it to total. Then we can also take the let me make this a double. Then I can actually take the price. Remember, the price, we are making reference to this attribute on line 7, and then we are setting it to the value of count, which is a local variable within that constructor there. So what's going to happen is that when we instantiate, let's actually instantiate object 2. So let's have constructors, then object 2, right? Then I call the constructors. But what I'm going to do this time around is that I'm actually going to pass maybe a string, right? Maybe let me have a string called product. Then let me also have a value of double. Maybe let me make this 5.3, right? Then what I can do down here is that I can actually print out those values that pertain to object 2. So let's see dot out the print line. Then let's actually compile and run this. So you see that this is for the first object, still something in $8.99, but you realize that we have product and 5.3, right? So if you look in the constructors, in the constructor for that is on line 14, you realize that we created a constructor that takes in 2 arguments, right? So basically, we can actually create a constructor that can take arguments upon creating your particular object. So this would simply set whatever the total that you put. Remember, total is actually the name for this product. So total in this case is product, right? If we put that as the name, it's actually going to override, or it's actually going to be stored inside of this string called name. Then this count right here, right? This is where we have the double count. It's actually going to be the new value for the price attribute that we've defined in line 7 there. So that's the lesson on constructors. So notice you can create a constructor that doesn't take arguments, or that doesn't have parameters. Then you can also create a constructor that does have parameters, but you need to remember that whenever you create the particular object, you need to assign those arguments to that particular constructor so that Java knows which constructor to call. Then also I think I demonstrated the concept that you can have several constructors within the same class. Is it such that by the time when you finally arrive to the stage whereby you want to create or instantiate an object, you will then choose which constructor you want to call. So that is going to be particularly useful for maybe say you are developing mission critical applications, and you have different, maybe say you are creating an employee management system, right? You have different employees, you have part-time employees, you have permanent employees, and so forth and so on. So yeah, I think that's just about it for this episode. I'll see you in the next one.